Suddenly, he remembered the results of Scully's analysis on the residue in the vial found in Sheck's swimming pool. Human ash, 4 decades old, and grainy sand. Coral sand. The General unfolded his hands again and stared at his fingernails. "I didn't suggest any such thing, Agent Mulder. You're free to think what you choose." "Why are you telling me all this?" he asked. "Do you want to make sure someone is caught for Nancy Sheck's death?" Braducas looked deeply saddened. "That's part of it," he said. "But also because I fear for my own safety." "Your safety? Why?" "Nancy was the DOE liaison for the Bright Anvil project. I am the Department of Defense liaison. I'm afraid I might be next on the list. I'm trying to hide. I've been staying in a different hotel every night. I haven't been home in days, though I'm not sure such measures will do any good." "I don't suppose you have any suggestions on how we might stop this thing?" Mulder asked. The General flushed again, though more in panic this time than in embarrassment. "Bright Anvil itself seems to be the link. Whatever has been awakened or at least triggered into violent action came about because of this impending test. There's no telling how long it's been around, but it became active only recently." Mulder jumped in. "Then whatever is going to happen, whatever event these killings are building towards, will probably occur out in the Marshall Islands. That's the only place we can be sure of." He plunged ahead without thinking. "General, my partner and I need to be there. I need to be at the site to see what's happening." The General stood up. "I'll make a few phone calls. I'll even call Assistant Director Skinner if need be. Just be ready to get on the plane. We don't have any time to lose." Anika Atoll, Marshall Islands, Western Pacific. Wednesday, across the International Date Line, 12:14 p.m. The atoll had recovered remarkably well in 40 years. The low, flat island, little more than a massive coral reef with a shallow dusting of topsoil, was once again burdened with lush tropical vegetation. Fish swarmed in the reefs and lagoons. Birds and butterflies thronged in the foliage above. When Captain Robert Ives had left here 4 decades earlier, he had been a young, low-grade seaman who had barely learned to shut up and do what he was told. The spectacular sawtooth nuclear test had been the most awe-inspiring sight his slate-gray eyes had ever witnessed. It had reduced Anika Atoll to little more than a hot, blasted scab. Its entire surface sterilized, its coral outcroppings sheared off in the boiling froth of the sea, vegetation crisped, wildlife exterminated. With amazing recuperative powers, nature had rapidly reclaimed the territory that humans had so swiftly and violently snatched away. Once again, Anika Atoll looked like an isolated island paradise, pristine and uninhabited. At least Captain Ives hoped it was uninhabited this time. On the shore of the atoll, sheltered behind the rugged coral rocks that formed the highest point of the island, Bear Dooley and his team members used sailors and Navy engineers to help prepare for their secret test. A small runway was cleared along the straight stretch of beach. Bulldozers offloaded from the Dallas plowed through the jungle, scratching narrow access roads from the sheltered control bunker to the lagoon on the far side of the atoll, where the Bright Anvil device would be set up and detonated. They constructed a bunker to house the controls that would run the small warhead detonation. Because the blockhouse would be so close to the detonation, it had to be incredibly sturdy. Inside the bunker, Bear Dooley supervised the installation of all his test equipment. Dooley listened in on the shortwave radio to regular weather updates for the Marshall Islands. Every time the announcement tracked the approaching tropical depression, now nearly a full-fledged hurricane, he grew ecstatic. "It's coming," Dooley had said to Ives the last time he received such news, "and we've got a lot of work to do. Timing is crucial." Ives let the man have his way. He had his orders, after all. He didn't think Bear Dooley was even aware of the previous H-bomb test that had taken place in the same area. Dooley didn't seem the type of man who had spent an inordinate amount of time studying history or worrying where things came from. Captain Robert Ives had hoped never to see Anika Atoll again. But now he had returned, for yet another secret nuclear test. Oakland Naval Base, Oakland, California. Thursday, 2:37 p.m. Mulder and Scully arrived in the San Francisco Bay Area, red-eyed and exhausted from all the travel, knowing they had a much longer trip still in front of them. Mulder rented the car, and they drove toward the Oakland Naval Base, then spent the better part of an hour at the gate showing their paperwork, answering questions, and finally arguing with a stoic military policeman who made repeated phone calls to his superiors inside. Exactly where the guard had directed them, they found the whale-sized C-5 transport. Small hydraulic vehicles were hauling cargo, stuffing crates into the swollen olive-colored belly of the plane. Mulder, carrying his own suitcase and briefcase, walked to the metal steps that led up to the aircraft passenger compartment. "I hope we can get ourselves a window seat," he said. "Non-smoking." "I think I'll try and take a nap on the way," Scully answered. Inside the no-frills transport plane, Mulder looked around the sharply shadowed interior, which was lit from behind and below by the open doors in the cargo compartment. Other passengers, naval officers and enlisted men, as well as half a dozen non-military types, moved about finding places to sit. Mulder and Scully searched for a comfortable seat, but all the chairs were hard and stiff-backed. They both buckled in. "Guess they don't have a first-class section," Mulder said. He turned around in his seat and recognized some of the civilians already sitting buckled in their seats. Scientists and technicians he had seen at the Teller Nuclear Research Facility. The big transport plane began to lurch along, lumbering into motion like a behemoth, as aerodynamic as a bumblebee but orders of magnitude louder. The C-5 accelerated down the runway and gracefully lifted off, hauling its enormous bulk into the air with a roar of jet engines. Before long, the aircraft had gained altitude, circled over the hills east of Oakland, and then headed straight out to sea. The aircraft struck heavy turbulence, jouncing the passengers from side to side in their seats. Scully held a white-knuckled grip on the arms of her chair. Mulder nonchalantly chose that moment to lean forward against the bucking carnival ride to pull out his briefcase. He snapped it open on his lap, ransacking it for papers. Mulder studied the tiny fly-speck dots out in the vast blue water off his map. He circled the areas with his finger. "I wonder why they're going way out here. The Marshall Islands are a U.S. protectorate, so I'm sure that has something to do with it. Could it be just to intercept the storm?" Scully perked up, finally having a subject on which she could discourse. She forced herself to ignore the rocking turbulence as she added her own knowledge to the discussion. "It probably has more to do with the track record of nuclear testing out there. The Marshall Islands chain is where most of the U.S. bomb blasts took place between 1946 and 1963. Hydrogen bombs and cobalt bombs, thermonuclear devices, everything too big to set off in Nevada. In fact, between 1947 and 1959, 42 nuclear devices were set off on these islands alone. The entire atoll of Eniwetok was like a hopscotch ground. Test detonations stepped from one clump of islets to another, vaporizing one lump of coral, then the next. The natives were evacuated, promised adequate compensation, but Uncle Sam never really came through for them. In fairness, nobody knew exactly what they were doing at the time, not even the weapons scientists. They made mistakes. Some bombs fizzled, others produced a much higher yield than expected. It's amazing to me how they just played with all that destructive potential. Mulder raised his eyebrows. "You're sounding pretty passionate there. Is this a particular interest of yours?" She looked at him, feeling her walls go up. "Used to be." "So what happened?" he asked. "With the testing, I mean." "All the atmospheric testing of atomic explosives ceased in 1963 with the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. But by that time, over 500 nuclear weapons had already been detonated by the U.S. and various other countries." 500? Mulder said. "Above ground? You're kidding, right?"